The Germans are a very industrial people, and the Russians, let me tell you something. The Russians act as if they're not afraid of the Germans. I believe, internally speaking, in their own internal dialogues, in their internal talks, whatever you want to call it, I believe that the Russians are terrified of the Germans. That's why they want to pull Germany into their realm. That's why they want to make an alliance with Germany to get on Germany's good side. I think Russia is terrified of Germany. Well, how do you know that, Theodore? I have something to say about this. Go back to what happened in the early 90s, late 1980s, early 90s. What happened under the H.W. Bush administration? The Russians said, hey, we don't want to see an independent Germany. The American government said, we're going to reunite Germany, East and West Germany. We're going to reunite them. We're going to make Germany whole again. And the Russians didn't like that. And the Russians told the Americans, listen, and this is documented by the CIA. The Soviets, the Russians really, told the Americans, listen, if you reunite Germany, it will eventually lead to the destabilization of Europe. This is what the Russians said before the reunification of Germany. They said, if you reunite Germany, it will lead to the destabilization of Europe. That's what the Russians told the Americans, and the Americans scoffed at the Russians. Under the H.W. Bush administration, the Americans told the Russians, hey, Mr. Gorbachev, we're going to reunite Germany, and we're going to include Germany as a member of NATO. We're going to pull Germany into the fold of NATO. And the Russians said, well, we don't really like that. And the Americans told the Russians, Mr. Gorbachev, which would you rather have? An independent Germany that can eventually get nuclear weapons? Or would you rather have a Germany that is under NATO/American control? Gorbachev thought about it and he said, well, I would prefer that Germany be under the control of NATO. I don't want an independent Germany. Why didn't the Russians want an independent Germany? Because they did not want a repeat of World War II. That's the reason why. And one of the ways, in fact, I would say the main way, the main method by which the Americans intimidated the Russians into agreeing to allow the Germans to enter NATO was telling the Russians, well, if the Germans don't enter NATO, they're going to be independent and they're going to make a really big, fat, powerful German army again. And they're going to get nuclear weapons. And then what are you going to do, Russia? What are you going to do about it, Russia? You better allow Germany to join NATO. And if you do, we will control Germany. We'll prevent Germany from becoming too powerful. That way you guys will be safe. You guys don't have to worry about a rising, powerful Germany ever again. And the Russians said, you know what? That's better than allowing the Germans to go rogue again. We don't want that to ever happen again. So the Russians gave the green light to the Americans to allow the Germans to join the fold of NATO. And that's what happened. Why did the Russians prefer that Germany join NATO? It was because they did not want an independent Germany. Why? World War I, World War II. It really is that simple. It really is that simple. That's it. That's all it comes down to. Leningrad, Stalingrad, Operation Barbarossa, all that shit. They don't want that Germany, that country ever to come back. And what are the Americans talking about? Bringing Germany back. What are the Germans talking about? Bringing Germany back. It is very, very dangerous what we are doing as a country. We are enabling the revival of German power. We are doing exactly the opposite of what we promised the Russians. We promised the Russians that we would prevent the Germans from ever reviving. And now we're doing the opposite of that promise. And we are helping to create the very monster that the Russians were and are still terrified of, which is a revived Germany. Nationalism is a package deal. You can't have nationalism and then pacifism at the same time. You're going to get nationalism, and then with that is going to come what? Militarism. And they're going to say, well, we have to get the military bigger. We got to get more people to enlist in the military because that's what the country needs. So what we are seeing right now in Europe is this revival of massive militarism. And that's why you see stories like this. Germany hopes to attract tens of thousands more military recruits as NATO strengthens its defenses. I'm telling you, and as nationalism grows, you're going to see militarism growing in Germany. Mark my words. Authorities have worked to raise esteem for military service, and in June, Germany marked an annual Veterans Day for the first time. Germany has committed billions to beefing up its military equipment after years of neglect. Now it's trying to persuade more people to join up and serve. More than 3.5 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine kickstarted efforts to revitalize the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, the challenge of strengthening the German military has grown along with fears of the threat from Moscow, alongside the higher military spending that Germany and NATO allies agreed on this year. The alliance is encouraging members to increase personnel numbers. They want to make the military bigger. They want to bring back the Wehrmacht. Berlin wants to add tens of thousands of service members. Chancellor Friedrich Merz says that, quote, because of its size and its economic strength, Germany is the country that must have the strongest conventional army in NATO. Yeah, on the European side. He has not defined that goal in detail, but the tone underscores a shift in a country that emerged only gradually from its post-World War II military reticence after reunification in 1990. Earlier this month, the military's top brass watched as a ferry packed with armored vehicles was escorted out of the Baltic port of Rostock. Drones were intercepted in the air and on the water, and fighter jets circled above. That was part of an exercise focused on moving troops and equipment to Lithuania. Ooh! And why is Germany so focused on Lithuania? What's right next to Lithuania? Is there a map in this article? Of course not. Here is Lithuania. That's where the Germans are sending their troops. Why are they sending soldiers into Lithuania? What is right next to Lithuania? Lithuania is literally in between Belarus and Russia. Well, no, Russia's right over here. Yes, but Russia is also right over here. You see this little land? Now, the map is made by pro-NATO people, obviously, because they're not defining the fact. They're not clearly showing that this little region right here is Russia. This is called Kaliningrad. This little region next to Poland and Lithuania is Russia. It is a province of Russia. Just like Alaska is a state of the United States, but it does not share a contiguous border with the United States, Kaliningrad is part of Russia, but does not share a contiguous border with Russia. And so Russia in this part of Europe lies in between Poland and Lithuania. And there is a little border line that goes from Belarus into Kaliningrad. That little border line is right in between Lithuania and Poland. So if Russia has a full-scale war with the Europeans, with the Germans and the French and their allies, the Russians are going to be focusing a lot on Lithuania. What are going to be the hotbeds of conflict? Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania. Kaliningrad. Lithuania also. Kaliningrad. Russia is going to want to secure Kaliningrad and make sure that these neighbors do not try to take it over. They're going to want to make sure that Germany doesn't try to take it over. So Germany is deploying troops into Lithuania because they know in a full-scale war, the concentration of fighting, much of the fighting, is going to be right here. So they're getting ready. And Belarus is effectively a part of Russia anyway. It's effectively an extension of Russia. I mean, Belarus literally just means white Russia. And so the Germans are going to have to deal with Belarus. The Europeans are going to have to deal with Belarus. So that's why they're putting all these troops in Lithuania. That way they can deal with Belarus and they can deal with the Russians in Kaliningrad. It's a preemptive deployment. That's what's happening. Yeah, so they put all these soldiers in Lithuania, and Lithuania, it says, is an ally on NATO's eastern flank, where modern Germany is stationing a brigade abroad on a long-term basis for the first time. Credible deterrence. Sorry, I got to do the German accent. Credible deterrence requires operational readiness. Yeah, said the Bundeswehr Chief of Staff, General Carsten Brewer. And operational readiness requires material, the personal training, and exercising. So they're getting their I'm telling you, they're bringing the Wehrmacht back. They're going to bring the SS back too. That's also coming. There's plenty to do. There's plenty to do on both material and personnel. There's plenty to do on both material and personnel in a country where the military was often viewed with indifference or suspicion, given the legacy of the Nazi past. Germany suspended conscription for men in 2011 and subsequently struggled to attract large numbers of short-term volunteers. And now, why have they struggled to recruit young men? It's because of a lack of nationalism. That's why they want to bring back nationalism. Hence, the refugee crisis. That's why I think the refugee crisis was engineered to bring back nationalism, to make it easier, to make the military stronger. And you could say, well, I mean, that's all a big conspiracy theory. Maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe it's all coincidental. But if it is coincidental, damn, that is a coincidence that really, really falls into the favor of the German militarists. Very convenient. How convenient. So it says here that in recent years, the number of military personnel has hovered just above 180,000, compared with 300,000 more than a third. Compared with 300,000 more than a third conscripts in 2001. Now the government wants to raise it to 260,000 over the next decade, and says it will also need around 200,000 reservists, more than double the current figure. Better pay is one way to make the Bundeswehr more attractive, said Thomas Viegold, a defense policy expert who runs the Augen Gerardus military blog. But a key issue is fixing the military's long-standing equipment problems, because a force that doesn't have enough tanks and doesn't have enough ships, that also doesn't have enough barracks, is not particularly attractive for applicants. So they're going to get the Navy bigger, the Air Force bigger. The Germans are also on their way to having their own fighter jet, their own European fighter jet. I think it's called the AWACS fighter jet, and they say that it's going to be very, very formidable. And it says here that F-35 fighter jets, Chinook transport helicopters, Leopard 2 tanks, frigates, and other hardware are on order after a €100 billion, $117 billion special fund was set up in 2002 to modernize the Bundeswehr. But they will take time, blah, blah, blah. Yes, of course, this is a gradual process. The cabinet last month approved plans for a new military service system meant to tackle the personnel challenge. It foresees more attractive pay and conditions for people who join up on a short-term basis, better training, and more flexibility on how long people can serve. The aim is to draw sufficient recruits without reviving conscription, an idea unpopular with the center-left junior partner in Merz's coalition, blah, blah, blah. So they're going to bring back the draft. Blah, blah, blah. They're going to bring back nationalism. Raising esteem for the military. Viegold noted that the military has had a different status in modern Germany than in countries such as Britain, France, and the US because of the country's history. There's no great enthusiasm to join the military. But the invasion of Ukraine means that the perception of the Bundeswehr as an important element of Germany has become much greater. So they're using the Russian war in Ukraine as a way to hype people up. Now, I think they're going to have to do more than just pointing to Russia. I think that's going to be effective for a lot of people in Germany, but I think to make it even more effective, to make the Germany more marketable for young German men to join, the Germans are going to have to really boost up nationalism. They're going to have to boost up that old Prussian militarism, bring back the recruitment posters, make the military cool. This is what the Germans are going to have to do, and this is what they are going to do. They're going to make the military cool again. True Germany, a true Deutschman fights for Deutschland, and only cucks avoid military service. I mean, they're really going to have to increase the pressure, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to increase the pressure. The amount of production of German military equipment is so minuscule. Guys, you keep bringing this up. This is an argument. This is not an argument, my friend. Yep, this is not an argument. It's going to grow. That's the whole point. They still can't match the Russians no matter what. No matter what, really? Are you sure about that, Victoria? Because that one single country was able to slaughter 30 million Russians. They lost, but they slaughtered 30 million Russians. If German men can no longer afford to live, they can join the military. That is what they're going for here. But it's going to take more. They're going to have to really get enthusiasm up. How does Germany think that Russia will let them build up their military like this? That's a good question. So I think that what is going to happen, this is my... I'm just gonna put it like this. This is a possible scenario as to how this could happen. The AfD is presenting itself as a pro-peace party. It is presenting itself as almost like a pro-Russia party. They're eventually going to dominate the government, or some nationalist party is going to dominate the government in Germany. Then they're going to say, we need to better relations with Russia. And they're going to better relations with the Russians. And the Russians are going to say, this is great. And while they are going to maintain diplomatic ties with the Russians, they're going to build up their military. And the Russians are going to say, well, these guys are our friends. And the Russians are going to fall for the old German trick, just like they did during the deal that the Soviets and the Nazis made when they made a trade deal, and then eventually Hitler invaded Russia. The Molotov-Ribbentrop scheme. The Germans did a trade deal with the Russians, seemed like they had really good diplomatic ties, and then, surprise, surprise, the Germans were invading Russia. Who defeated who? No, the Russians did defeat the Germans, that is true. But 30 million Russians were killed. My point is, yeah, Russia is going to win. I don't think Germany can defeat Russia. My point is, imagine this. You have Germany. All of Germany's European auxiliaries, so all the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, the Netherlands, possibly France, possibly Italy, Poland, possibly Poland, and then Turkey, massive country, massive army, huge navy. All the Central Asian countries that are pro-Turkey. If the Germans and the Turks can amass such a massive alliance, they will be a huge existential threat to the Russians. And then the Russians are really looking at a serious threat. Bundeswehr, which is the German armed forces, all right, they are really preparing for a serious war with Russia. Bundeswehr is preparing to receive 1,000 wounded soldiers every day in case of war with Russia. The Bundeswehr is preparing to receive around 1,000 wounded soldiers per day amid the growing threat of a NATO war with Russia. Reuters reported on this. Moscow denies preparing for a conflict with the alliance, but a series of airspace violations by Russia. Okay, I don't really believe this. I think this is all a psyop. But it says that the Russians violated European airspace. I don't really believe that. And it says that Russian drones were all over NATO countries, Denmark, Sweden, etc. Germany's Surgeon General, Ralph Hoffmann, explained that the number of wounded so in a serious war with Russia, between Russia and Germany, it says that Germany's Surgeon General, Ralph Hoffmann, explained that the number of wounded would depend on the intensity of the fighting and the composition of the units involved. Realistically, we are talking about a figure of around 1,000 wounded troops per day. So this is like World War II. He told Reuters in an interview with Reuters, European militaries, including their medical services, stepped up preparations for potential conflict with Moscow in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Europe's biggest conflict since World War II. Hoffmann emphasized that Germany is continually updating its medical training, incorporating the critical lessons learned from the war in Ukraine. The nature of warfare has changed dramatically in Ukraine, Hoffmann said, citing a shift from gunshot injuries to blast wounds and burns caused by drones and loitering munitions. Hoffmann emphasized the importance of providing providing long-term stabilization for the wounded directly on or near the front line, citing the experience of the Ukrainian military. He also noted the need for flexible transportation options, recalling that Ukraine had already used medical trains and buses. So they're preparing for massive casualties. Massive casualties, guys. Who will cause an incident to trigger a pan-European war? And look what it says here. It's become increasingly clear that avoiding a direct armed conflict between continental Europe and the Russian Federation is unlikely. What exactly could serve as the shot in Sarajevo? So what's going to spark a war between the Russians and the Europeans? The British were the first to voice the idea of sending an expeditionary force to Ukraine. However, London quickly faded into the background, ceding the lead to Paris. They're eventually going to cede the lead to Germany. They don't want to do that now because they don't want to appear like they're Nazis, but eventually that's what's going to happen. Now, President Macron is the main lobbyist for the deployment of European restraints to Ukraine. Russia must be portrayed as the aggressor in order to explain to the old world's population, which is unwilling to fight, why they should get off the couch and join the Eastern Front. In other words, Europeans must be motivated to fight not for the division of Ukraine, but for Europe itself. That's what I've been saying. You're not going to convince most people to join the military because, well, you have to join because Ukraine. You have to give them a spiritual, metaphysical reason to join. And what's that going to be? Nation, blood, soil. The armed conflict must be local. No NATO tanks near Moscow or a blockade of St. Petersburg. Europeans will not repeat their past mistakes, so they are prepared to fight Russia only in their own backyard in the Baltic, where they have a total advantage. So it looks like the next great European war is going to spark in the Baltic region, and that may explain why the Germans have deployed soldiers into Lithuania, because next to Lithuania is Belarus and Russia, really. Kaliningrad. No more brother wars. Yeah, I've heard that a million times. I'm sorry, sir, but if you look at all of the wars in Europe's history, you could fill a colossal library with books on all of the wars that have occurred in Europe. You can go all the way back to prehistoric times, and you can read up on how the Anatolian farmer people were butchered by people from Northern Europe, and you can look at the pits that archaeologists have discovered in various parts of Germany, for example, in various parts of Europe. For example, in Germany, they found a giant pit that had enough skeletal remains that they concluded that hundreds of people were butchered in very brutal ways, and their bodies were dumped into a pit, essentially a mass grave. And this happened thousands of years before Christ. We can go back to the Germanic tribes and how they fought one another and killed one another. We can go back to the Roman Empire and the Roman Empire, how the Roman Empire invaded Germany and Gaul, and how the Roman Empire invaded what is now England. We can go all the way back to the Vikings and how the Vikings invaded their neighbors and sex trafficked young Christian girls and boys to the Muslims. We can go back to the Ottoman Empire being ran by European Muslims. Yes, the Ottoman Empire was not ran by Arabs. It was ran by European Muslims, white Muslims, and how the Ottoman Empire invaded the Balkans, and how the Ottoman Empire invaded Greece, and how the Ottoman Empire invaded Cyprus. We can go back to the British Empire and its wars with the French and with the Spanish. We can go back to the 100 Years' War in the Middle Ages between the British and the English and the French, and how the English devastated their French neighbor and terrorized France for a century. How 3 million Europeans were killed in the 100 Years' War. We can go back to the 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics, and between the French and the Habsburg Empire. We can go back to the 80 Years' War between the Dutch and the Spanish. We can go back to the 50 Years' War between the French and the Spanish. We can go back, my friend, to how the Poles and the Russians killed one another. We can go back to how the Ukrainians and the Poles killed one another. We can go back to World War I and how millions of Europeans killed each other. How millions of Europeans died on the battlefields in Belgium and France, in Germany, in Austria, how the Austrians invaded Serbia and killed 600,000 Serbs, mainly civilians. We can go back to the First Balkan War, in which the Balkans and the Balkan peoples, the Serbs and the Montenegrins and the Greeks and the Bulgarians, fought against the Ottomans. We can go back to the Second Balkan War, in which the Serbs and the Greeks and the Montenegrins fought against the Bulgarians. We can go back to those days. We can go back to World War II and read about how the Ustasha killed a million Serbs. We can go back to World War II and read about how the Albanians slaughtered Serbs by the thousands and how the Bosnians slaughtered Serbs by the thousands. We can go back to those days and read up on how the Germans killed 30 million Russians. We can go back to those days and we can read about how the Lithuanians killed and raped thousands of Poles for days on end. We can go back to those days and read on how the Ukrainians slaughtered 100,000 ethnic Poles and how Poles slaughtered thousands of Ukrainians. We can go back to those days and we can look at history idealistically and say no more brother wars, but my friend, history is a law that you cannot break. History is a law, just like physics is a law, just like you have the law of gravity and the law of thermodynamics and the second law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. We can say no more brother wars all we want, but yet we can look at Ukraine and see Slavs killing one another, Slavs killing each other. 1 million Russians and Ukrainians dead, many more wounded. We can say no more brother wars all we want and wax poetic, but we will only see the dreary poetic reality of life, the dreary and depressing and gloomy law of history, and that is that history may not repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. Serbs slaughtered Bosnians by the thousands, and more Bosnians were slaughtered than Serbs. Well, we could talk about the Bosnians slaughtering the Serbs, and we could talk about the Serbs slaughtering the Bosnians. My point is that they killed each other, and the Serbs and the Bosnians and the Croats and the Montenegrins and the Macedonians are all the same people. They are all the same people. Bosnians and Croats and Serbs, they all speak the same language. They look exactly alike. They have similar names. They are the same damn people, and yet they kill one another. So much for all this talk about how, oh, I want people around me to look like me. Well, go to the Balkans. They all look like each other, and yet they all hate each other. You guys do realize that after World War I, I'm looking at this Oblivion stuff. What the hell is wrong with me? You guys do realize that after World War I, Germany's military was nothing. Literally nothing. It was garbage. They barely had a navy, barely had an army. They didn't have an air force. They didn't have a general staff. They didn't have any of that stuff. They were nothing. They were a complete, flaccid entity that was under the control of the Allied occupation. And even from that very decrepit and pathetic condition, the Germans still rose up and they made a massive army, the likes of which hasn't been seen ever since that time. I don't see any Euro doing anything to secure their own supply chain regarding semiconductor technology. The problem is you can't build chip factories from nothing. Their only strength is the Dutch ASML, lithography equipment, and chemical engineering that's also going through hard times. Okay, you're talking about microchips, and you're talking about transductors or whatever the hell it is. Semiconductors. Okay. Let's read this article together. I had to Google this. Let's read this article together about semiconductor production in Germany. Various segments and regions shape the German semiconductor market, each showing unique trends and revenue growth potential. I hate this freaking way of writing. Key growth drivers, opportunities, and challenges influence this dynamic market, which is further impacted by recent developments and competitive strategy. Get to the point! Significant strategies such as expansions, product launches, partnerships, mergers and acquisitions have significantly shaped the competitive German semiconductor industry. Within each subsegment, leading market players demonstrate core competencies that define their industry positions. Germany is crucial. This is from 2024, so this is pretty recent. Germany is crucial in the global semiconductor industry and is recognized for its extensive network of leading device manufacturers and suppliers. The country is focused on expanding its semiconductor production capabilities, aiming to capture at least 20% of Europe's semiconductor output by 2030. So there is a semiconductor microchip production industry in Germany. According to OpenPR, the German government is set to invest up to 50 billion euros, securing Germany's position as a key semiconductor hub. The government's investment in the German semiconductor market will recruit new enterprises to the country, expand the capacity of existing companies, generate jobs, and stimulate the economy. Further, it will help to ensure a steady supply of semiconductors to the world while boosting Germany and other countries' economies. So they're not only planning on making semiconductors, they're not only planning on massively increasing semiconductor production for Germany, but they're also planning on producing enough semiconductors to sell to other countries. So Germany is planning on becoming a massive hub for the production of microchips. Saxony and Saxony-Anhalt, oh, that's funny, that's where all the Nazis are central to the German semiconductor landscape, and Saxony emerging as a prominent hub for semiconductor production in Europe. The region hosts advanced facilities operated by industry leaders such as Global Foundries, Bosch, and Infineon. The resurgence of the German semiconductor industry highlights its strategic importance in driving technological advancements across sectors like autonomous driving, renewable energy, smart grids, and advanced medical technology. So they do have a massive semiconductor industry. They do have a lot of semiconductor production. They're increasing it tremendously. They are increasing it precipitously to the point where they're not only going to be making massive amounts of semiconductors for Germany alone, but enough to sell to other countries. So, I mean, I'm seeing the opposite of what you're talking about here. So Germany definitely does have the technological capacity to be a massive hub for semiconductor production, and to a certain extent, it already is. I can read on more. According to Spherical Insights, a rising household disposable income, a rapidly growing population, and increasing urbanization drive strong demand for regular advanced consumer electronics. Integrated circuit chips are essential components in various devices such as smartphones, washing machines, TVs, and refrigerators. In response to growing consumer demands for advanced electronics, several leading consumer electronics brands in Germany invested significantly in developing new products, etc., etc., etc. Additional urbanization, industrialization, and government investments, that's the military, in smart city projects, there you go, are expected to increase semiconductor demand further, fueling the growth of the German semiconductor market. I mean, guys, are we really this ahistorical? I mean, seriously, guys. And I mean, I don't mean this in any disrespectful way, but you're Russian. You should know this more than any one of us. Your country faced Germany. Germany was a nothing country after World War I. It rose above the ashes of World War I and became one of the most powerful countries in the world, and was able to slaughter tens of millions of your people on the battlefield. And now we're going to sit here and say, like, oh, Germany will never come back. That's impossible. They were saying the same thing right after World War I. Germany will never come back. Germany is one of the technological centers of the earth. Germany has one of the largest economies in the world. Germany is one of the most important geopolitical centers in the world. It is at the heart of Europe. Germany is the only country in the history of mankind that faced America, Britain, France, half of France, the entire Russian Empire, all at the same time, and still managed to instill the fear of God in all of these countries. Are we really going to sit here and say, oh, Germany's nothing? You guys are talking as if Germany is like we're talking about fucking Papua New Guinea here. This ain't no fucking Papua New Guinea. This ain't Fiji. All right? Let's be more historically minded here. They are the Japan of Europe. That is why after World War II, America said, which European country are we going to which European country are we going to use to maintain the strength of the dollar in Europe? Germany. They didn't pick Finland. They didn't pick Serbia. They didn't pick fucking Albania. They didn't pick England. Germany, because Germany is the most industrial country in all of Europe, and the German people are the most industrious people in all of Europe. They are the most industrious people in all of Europe. Guys, we have to stop being so ahistorical and so historically retarded. I'm serious. We really have to stop. It is so counterproductive to be this ahistorical. When we see something that is so obvious, which country in Europe is going to come back? Oh, I don't know. I think they're England because they got the Bank of England, guys. No, it's Germany, because that's what always happened. You can go all the way back, guys, my friends, comrades. We can go all the way back to the Middle Ages. Not the Middle Ages. I guess you could say the Middle Ages. We can go all the way back to the 15th century. We can go all the way back to the Teutonic Knights. What was happening during the Crusades of the Teutonic Knights? The Teutonic Knights were used by Poland to kill Russians. What is Poland doing today? Poland is saying, Deutschland, you have to rise up. We can go back to the Teutonic Knights. We can go back to the 30 Years' War, when the German Protestants had an alliance with the Ottomans, and they were planning on invading Poland. We can go back to World War I, World War II, and we see not the same exact type of scenarios, but we see overlap. We see similarities. We cannot ignore the law of history. This is why I keep saying history is a law. It's like the law of thermodynamics. It's like the law of gravity. It's like the law of physics. It's a law, and it's a law that we cannot escape. Who would have thought we'd have to convince the Russians? The problem with Russia today, this is something that I've been noticing for years, is a lot of Russians, and I'm not saying this is all of them, but a lot of Russians are subscribing to basically this Eurasianist way of thinking that says, we can make an alliance with Germany, we can make an alliance with Turkey, and we can make a massive alliance, right, between Russia, Germany, Turkey, Central Asian countries, China, and together we can form the most powerful alliance in the world. Now, if the Russians succeed in this enterprise, sure, they would absolutely be the most powerful alliance in the world, and they would push America right into the fucking backwater of the world. Americans will go right into the backwaters, and they'll become what the Soviet Union was what Russia was after it fell in the 1990s. But that's not going to happen. The Germans are not going to make this massive alliance with the Russians. If they do, it'll be only to trick the Russians, like they did with the Molotov-Ribbentrop deal. It's not going to happen. But the Russians have this idea, well, if we can work with the Germans. That way, by working with the Germans, we can have our presence, our influence in the heartland of Europe. Okay, and then we can work with the Japanese, work with the Turks, make this big Eurasian alliance and blah, blah, blah. And then by doing that, we'll be so powerful, no one's going to mess with us. And America will become insignificant. Well, yeah, that's true. If you succeed in that, sure. America will be insignificant. Absolutely. Because America wouldn't have as much influence in Europe. America wouldn't have as much influence in the heart of Europe. So America would lose. If America loses Europe, America loses its empire. America loses its geopolitical significance. If you go back to Zbigniew Brzezinski, he said that whoever controls Belarus and Ukraine basically controls Europe. Whoever controls Europe controls the world. So if America loses Europe, that's it. That's the end of America's empire. And America will become just a den of, I don't know, soybean farmers. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, that's what America would be reduced to. America would still be strong to a certain extent because of all the oil and natural gas that we have. But America would lose its empire. And that's what Russia wants to do. Russia wants to shatter the American empire. That's what Russia wants to do. And one of the reasons as to why Russia launched this war in Ukraine, it wasn't just to create a hub or a space between Europe and Russia, but it was also to sow seeds of doubt in the heart of Europe when it comes to the reliability of the American empire. So the Russians have said, "Hey, look, we're invading Ukraine, and Poland's not doing shit. Finland's not doing shit. All these European countries aren't doing shit. Oh, look, America's not doing shit either. Even though, I mean, America did make security guarantees to Ukraine under Bill Clinton. Go look into it. Bill Clinton made a deal with Ukraine that if Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, that America would be in charge of Ukraine's security. Do we see American soldiers in Ukraine right now? No, we don't. We don't see that. So Europe, Germany, Deutschland, you can't trust the Americans. And this is one of the goals of the Russians. The Russians want to get the Europeans to say, we can't trust you, America. So that way, NATO would begin to crack through untrustworthiness in the American security umbrella. And NATO would eventually crack. And some American president will just say, you know what? You're right. You guys can't really rely on us. We need to be focusing on America. You guys are in charge of your own concerns. And then Russia would step right in and say, you want some of our cheap gas? You want our cheap oil? We'll build that pipeline. And there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. I mean, I don't blame Russia for wanting to do this. I'm just explaining to you what Russia's strategy is. That's Russia's strategy. And then that way, Russia could deepen ties with Germany, deepen ties with these European countries. And perhaps the Russians could tell the Poles, hey, Poland, we know that Lvov used to belong to you guys. You guys want Lvov? We can become friends. Yes, let's bring back the Lithuanian-Polish Commonwealth. And Russia wants to deepen ties with its European neighbors. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Europe is Russia's neighbor. I would want to do the same thing. And so the whole idea is to shatter NATO, shatter the American empire. This is the idea. So a lot of Russians have this idea that Germany will never be a threat. Turkey will not really be a threat. We are fine. Because they have this idea that maybe we can really make that Molotov-Ribbentrop plan actually work this time. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And the reason why it's not going to work is because these regional powers, Russia, Germany, Turkey, they all have their own interests. And as I've said many times, these interests are antithetical to each other. Turkey's interests are antithetical to Russia's interest. Turkey wants to control the Black Sea. Turkey wants to maintain its control over access from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. Turkey wants to control Syria. Turkey wants to dominate the Middle East. Turkey wants to have influence in the Balkan region. Well, the Balkan region is part of Russia's backyard. It's also part of Turkey's backyard. So there's antithetical interest. Germany and Russia have antithetical interest. Germany wants to be the most dominating power in Europe. Germany wants to have influence in Ukraine. Germany wants to put troops in Ukraine. They have antithetical interests. They're not going to get along at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, it's about resources and it's about power and money. And the reason why Germany invaded Russia was to steal all of Russia's natural resources. And that's what the Germans want to do. This is why anytime there was talk about a ceasefire in Ukraine, what do the Europeans always say? What do the Germans always say? We want to put troops in the parts of Ukraine that are not under Russian control. Why did the Germans want to do this? Why do the French want to do this? Why? Because they want to control Ukraine. Bottom line. And they will say, well, we have to be in charge of Ukraine's security. It's not about Ukraine's security. It's about controlling Ukraine. It's not about Ukraine's security. It's about Ukraine's resources. There's a lot of money worth in resources in Ukraine. That's what they want. Just like they wanted Ukraine's very fertile land during World War I. That's the reason why Germany wanted to control Ukraine. When Germany had the Brest-Litovsk conference with the Soviets, in, I want to say 1918, the Germans told the Soviets, you need to create an independent Ukrainian state. And the Soviets complied. Now, did the Germans really want an independent Ukraine? No, they don't. They wanted a Ukraine that they could control. And during World War II, the Germans pushed the Russians out of Ukraine. They pushed the Soviets out of Ukraine and took it over. So this is what this is about. Go back to Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the masterminds of America's Cold War policy. What did he say? He said, go back to the Mackinder rule. Go back to the Mackinder rule. Whoever controls Belarus and Ukraine controls Europe. They control the heartland. And so that's what this has been about. It's been this way for a long time. So the Europeans aren't just going to say, okay, well, Russia, you can have your troops in eastern Ukraine, and we're just not going to put soldiers in the rest of Ukraine. That's not what the Europeans want, and they will not comply with that. They won't. And the Russians have made it very clear. They said, I think it was Mr. Lavrov or whatever, who said, or Peskov, it was some Russian official said, you put one European soldier in Ukraine, that's a declaration of war. Why are the Russians so adamant about it? Because they know what the Europeans want. They know. They remember Operation Barbarossa. They know what the Europeans are planning. They know. You put European soldiers right next to us, all it's going to take is one little false flag attack, bam. They could start killing each other, and you could have a World War II type scenario, another massive European war all over again. It is a very capricious and very unstable situation, but we got to look at history.